This is an important class in the study of economics. There's got a lot of detail in here, and I'd like you to have a break during the course of studying this class. Perhaps just knock it off and go and relax for a while. Come back and do it again. And please try to make your own notes from it, because this class is full of meaning and gives us a real insight into the subject. So it is very, very important. Now, let's go through it. We'll start with the definitions of economics that have been proposed by Kennan, Marshall and Robbins. Now, these are three famous economists. Cannon's definition, the study of things having to do with man's material welfare. Well, I've written in the criticisms here. We don't know what man's material welfare means, and we don't know what things mean, the study of things. So it sounds like a lovely definition, but it's in fact very vague. So for that reason, we're going to rule out Cannon's definition, despite the fact one of the great economists of all times. Marshall, who gave us supply and demand and our understanding of the market, and who is the father of economics, he said economics is the study of mankind in the ordinary business of life. Again, problem. What does the ordinary business of life mean? It's too vague. We can't cope with this one. It's ordinary business of life. I'm not sure what ordinary means. So we have to rule out Marshall's definition. Now, those are two big names in economics, and their definitions haven't made the grade. Let's move on. Robbins' definition, put forward by Lord Robbins, Lionel Robbins, in the 1930s. He said, economics is a science which studies human behaviour as a relationship between ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. Now that's a big definition. There's a lot of material in here. And in fact, if we just highlight the material we need to look at: economics, science, human behaviour, ends, scarce means, alternative uses. All of these terms are important in economics, and this definition managed to squeeze all of them into one statement. So this is our definition of economics. This is the one we use, and this is the very famous definition put forward by Lord Robbins, as I said. And it's one that anyone who studies economics should really be aware of and understand it. And I'm going to go through each of these terms, the terms in red. I'm going to go through it fairly fast, fairly quickly. If you want more detail, I'm putting up more material on each of these as time goes by. So keep an eye on what we're posting, and you'll get specific classes on, for example, on science and economics, or on opportunity cost, which is the last one, alternative uses. So you'll find extra classes coming on board over time. So keep an eye out for those. Now, the rest of this one, let's talk about just over the top, in a sense, just vaguely discuss what's meant by science and human behaviour, ends, scarce means, and alternative uses. So that's the rest of this particular class. Now, start with economics as a science. Well, neoclassical economics, which is the sort of economics that people study at universities, uses mathematical techniques to analyse economic relationships. So people who go to university to study economics nowadays, generally speaking, study quite a lot of mathematics. And the models of economics are mostly cast in mathematical terms. Whether that's right or wrong is debatable. Many economists think it's wrong. We can't use mathematical techniques when we're dealing with people. People are too variable. That's part of the debate. But economics does attempt to use the scientific method, and I'll have a few words about that in a moment. The scientific method is this idea of we postulate a relationship between two variables. We say something depends on something else. The price of bananas determines the demand for bananas. I've just postulated a relationship between the price of bananas and the demand for bananas. I've stated one. I've postulated that relationship between two variables, the price and the actual demand. But in the scientific method, we haven't postulated the relationship. We should collect some data because we want to test it. And once we've got the data, we analyze the data to determine the relationship. And once we've got the relationship, we get generalizations. So we could say, look, every time the price of bananas increases, there is less demand for bananas. The quantity of demand of bananas demanded falls off. The price has gone up. So we've generalized. Now, it is contentious what I'm doing here. A lot of economists, many economists from different traditions will say, we shouldn't do this. We're dealing with people, and people are very variable. And we can't cast them in this very rigid light. And we'll have to talk about this in subsequent classes as well. Is the methodology of economics correct? But for the moment, let's go with it. Here's an example. Every time the price of petrol rises, less petrol is sold. Okay, every time the price of petrol rises, less petrol is sold. Why every time? Well, we want it to be every time because we want to generalize. But that's a big statement. Now, every time the price of petrol rises, less petrol is sold. Every time. There's no exception. How do we know this? We have to test the markets. How do we know it'll happen every time, though? Even if we test the markets, we're looking at historic data. We look what happened yesterday or last week or last year or 10 years ago. How do we know what's going to happen tomorrow? If the price of petrol rises tomorrow, will less petrol be sold? Now, let's forget about electric cars and modern technology and stuff. We'll talk about traditional, old-fashioned petrol cars. How do we know if the price of petrol rises, less petrol will be demanded? Well, it makes some sort of sense if we think of a lot of goods. As the price goes up, we economize. We cut back because it's now become expensive. This is part of what we call the inductive method. And in the inductive method, we use something called the principle of enumeration, the principle of counting up. So we look at the price of petrol rises, less petrol is sold. And we make a note of that. And we go to the next filling station and we ask them, you've put the price of petrol up, what's happened to the demand? Has it gone up, down? What's happened? We make a note again. And we continue to do that. And after a while, we generalize. We say, look, this happens everywhere. The price of petrol goes up, less petrol is sold. And now we're generalizing over the whole country. We might be generalizing over the whole world. But there's a big generalization to make. Look at this. All swans are white. How do we know all swans are white? Well, all the swans we see are white. But there are a lot of swans we don't see. So we see swans and they're white. And therefore we conclude all swans are white. So we generalize and we induce then, if we see some white swans, we think all swans are white. All. We go from some to all. Every time the price of petrol rises, less petrol is sold. The price of petrol has just increased, therefore less petrol will be sold. We're generalizing. All A is B. Every time the price of petrol rises, less petrol is sold. I've put it in different colours. Now we have three parts to this statement. Every time the price of petrol rises, less petrol is sold. Every time gives us a time dimension. The price of petrol, that gives us the price, and less petrol is sold gives us the quantity. Now let's look at this. We use what's known as the deductive method. If we say all A is B, that's our major premise. That's our major statement. All A is B. How do we know all A is B? Well, we know it by enumeration, like I said earlier. We go back to enumeration. We have made some observations, and out of the observations we've generalized. Now we're going to use this generalization, this major premise, all A is B. Now let's say if all A is B and we've just observed A, that's a minor premise, it was just A, and we conclude B. B happens. You have to think about this one. All A is B. If A, then B. That's logic. Positive statements. Well, we have two types of statements in economics, positive and what we call normative. Positive statements can be tested. A positive statement can be tested. If I say to you the rate of inflation in the UK currently is 40%, you can test it. It's not 40%. You can come back and say, no, you were wrong. But you tested it. It was a positive statement. That's a positive statement. All dogs can fly. You can test it. If we can test it, it's a positive statement. So we have this idea of what is positive based on testability. It's a positive statement. Contrast that with normative statements. The government should do something about road congestion. This is a matter of opinion. Normative statements are matters of opinion. The government should solve the problem of road congestion. They should. It's not positive. Can't test it. It's my opinion. And you may have opinions. The government should do something, or somebody should do something, or that company should change its logo. It should change its logo. I don't like its logo. They should change it. Should, normative. Normative statement. If it's a statement of opinion, it's normative. So that is a normative statement. The government should do something about road congestion. It cannot be tested. It's a statement of opinion. Next part of the definition is human behaviour. Well, economics is studying humans, and therefore it is a social science. So it's natural sciences are areas like physics, biology, chemistry. If you work in those areas, the materials you're working with do not have consciousness. A particle does not have consciousness, to the best of our knowledge, although there are experiments in physics which are slightly worrying. But never mind, not in this class. In physics, in biology, and in chemistry, we work with, or scientists work with, materials that do not have a consciousness. In economics, we're dealing with people. People have consciousness. So the relationships in economics are much more complex. They involve psychological and cultural variables, and we can't really model them. And that's a problem. So if we can't model them, why do economists do it? Well, they do it to try and get an insight into what's happening in the world, but they do it under really restrictive conditions. They make very strong assumptions about people's behaviour. And we'll see how that works as well as we work our way through economics. In economics, there are more variables to be considered in the social sciences, and in economics, and in sociology and so on. There are more variables to be considered than in the natural sciences, generally speaking. If we're talking about the economy, well, how many people live in the country? Because each one of them will have an opinion. And the opinions could be different. They could have very strong opinions, or they may not care, or the intensity of the feelings may not be there, or they might be very strongly motivated and have intense feelings about something. It's very complicated in economics. Whereas a physicist dealing with a particle, the particle doesn't set out to upset the physicist. Whereas people might set out to upset economists, or just have behaviour that's very difficult to model. So man is very complex, and probably more complex than a lot of subject matters in the natural sciences. In fact, we could say we are perverse. We don't want to be predictable. If you say we're predictable, it's an insult if you say somebody's predictable. You're a very predictable person. You're very boring. You're very predictable. And that means that economists and social scientists really have no chance in trying to model people like you and I. There's a group of economists called the Austrian economists. We're not going to deal with them in these classes, but I want to make you aware of them. They consider man far too complex to be modelled mathematically, and they reject completely the scientific approach. They rely instead on subjective behaviour in their analysis of economic situations. So subjectivity is the order of the day, whereas for neoclassical economics, the sort of economics that is widespread in colleges and universities, is what we call positive economics. It's testable. Subjective economics, not testable. So there are economists around who disagree with the definition we're doing right now and the way we're doing economics. And we have to recognise what they're saying and also be sympathetic to them, because they do have a point as well. Sometimes we use this expression, ceteris paribus, when we have a lot of assumptions. It's too complicated, so we just get rid of everything. We assume them away. We say ceteris paribus. Look, the quantity demanded for tomatoes depends on the price of tomatoes, your income, tastes, availability, health warnings. It depends on a lot of factors. Too complicated. So we say the demand for tomatoes depends on the price. Hold everything else constant. We'll just ignore everything else. Just forget that. And because we're doing that, because we're holding something constant, we do it in Latin. We say ceteris paribus. Everything else being constant. Everything else staying the same. So you'll see sometimes as you work your way through economics, something depends on something else, ceteris paribus. And what that simply means is there are other variables there, there are other issues that have been held constant. So people can look at that one particular aspect that they were interested in, but they're assuming everything else doesn't change. You will see how it works out as we work our way through the subject. It becomes second nature after a couple of lectures on economics. The last part, ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. This is back to the Robbins definition, as you can see. Ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. Ends may be considered as our wants. That's the ends. That's what we're working for. We're working to satisfy our wants. The ends are our wants. Ends and scarce means. Means are the methods by which we use to satisfy our wants. So means, the means of production, for example, we work in factories, we work in offices, we work on farms, we work as fishermen, whatever. So we have a variety of work tasks that we try to complete. Individually, we specialize, but we work in a society where many people do many different things, each one specializing in something different. And we do that to get the resources, to get the means to satisfy our wants. So we have farmers who produce food. We have lorry drivers who operate the logistics system and deliver the goods to us. We have teachers who teach in schools, and we have doctors who look after us. And so we have specialization in society. But we're using means, we're using all of these to satisfy our wants. And wants lead to our demand for goods. That's where we get our demand for goods. Wants arise in our heads. It is psychological. It's difficult to imagine wants in the absence of this psychological component. It's difficult because in the absence of that, we're not really being human. We are operating as if we are something else. So wants arise in our heads. It's a psychological requirement that we need food, we need sustenance, we need shelter, but as time goes by, we have more elaborate ones. We need holidays, we need cars, and we need laptop computers and so on. But this is psychological. All the wants arise in our head. We have biological wants. We do get hungry. We need food. That's a biological requirement. We need shelter and heat. In the winter time, we need to stay warm and stay out of the elements. We want food and shelter, but we also want luxury goods. And this is a function of advertising. To a large extent, the luxury goods that we require have been instilled in us. We watch advertisements, we encounter them in magazines, in newspapers, on television, on the internet, and over a period of time they influence us. So we want our biological needs met, food and shelter and heat. We also want higher order goods met. And we'll see this also in other subject areas in business studies. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, which crops up in several of the other areas in our study of business, starts with fundamental needs being met first, but over time we go to more and more luxurious and more advanced wants, and we want those solved. So we have biological. We've also got cultural, new fashions and trends in society. Nothing you can see. There is an industry that's trying to get us to buy fashionable items. And that same industry is trying to, I suppose, destroy the old fashions and introduce new fashions. It's what keeps the cogs of industry going around. So you buy something, it's fashionable. Unfortunately, next year it will be not fashionable. So something else will have replaced it. And that's a little unfortunate, but that's also an influence on our demands for goods. We have a pressure to conform, and it may be a function of the advertising industry. If you see the advertisement sufficient number of times, we may become inculcated, we may become affected by the advertisement, and we'll want to purchase the item. So that's an influence on our demand as well. By and large, humans have many different types of wants and needs. We don't just want some things. We don't want just the basics. We want higher order goods. We want luxury goods. So even though we satisfy our demand for those, as I said earlier, our demand goes even higher. And the advertising industry and the marketing industry are there to ensure that we're being pushed along, working harder and harder to get more goods to satisfy higher order requirements. So we satisfy our requirements by getting goods, physical items such as food, or services, non-physical, and also by getting these other higher order goods, the more fashionable goods. But we do tend to have unlimited wants. Well, why we've got that? Probably a function of advertising and marketing, and repetitive advertising in particular. There are some people who are very happy with what they've got and are not influenced. But for the vast majority, that's why those industries exist. There are essentially three reasons, therefore, why wants and needs are unlimited. Goods eventually wear out and need to be replaced, so we have a replacement demand. New or improved products become available. When something new comes out, we want it. It's a novelty, so we're interested. And also, people get fed up with what they already own. They want to change. They're fed up with whatever they've got. Commodities, goods and services are produced by using resources called factors of production. And we need to remember this one. We use factors of production to make items. And there are 4 factors of production: land, labour, capital, and entrepreneurship. And each of these are rewarded by, well, land gets a rent, labour gets wages, capital gets interest, and the entrepreneur gets a profit. And the descriptions, well, land is all natural resources, so it's fisheries, forestry, agriculture, all natural resources, mining, all of that is land. It's all grouped under land. Labour is physical and mental work, not work of people. And capital, all man-made tools and machines. So we take the natural resources and process the natural resources into man-made tools and machines. That becomes capital. And enterprise is the act of bringing all of this together and organising it. And that's done by the entrepreneur. The economic problem. Well, the economic problem refers to scarcity of commodities. There's only a limited number of resources available to produce the unlimited amount of goods and services we desire. We always want more. And the problem is we need to ration out what we've got. So we need to ration what we got, otherwise we'll run out. So this is illustrated a bit like the water-diamond paradox. Why is water more valuable in the desert compared to modern cities? And why are diamonds more valuable in modern cities compared to the desert? It's a reasonable question. Actually, I'll go back and just give you the point here is that water is scarce in the desert. That's why it's very valuable. And diamonds are scarce in modern cities. That's why they're valuable. But if you offer somebody a diamond in the desert, it doesn't really matter a lot. If they're dying from thirst and you give them a choice between water and a diamond, they'll pick the water, chances are. In a modern city, if you give somebody a choice between water or a diamond, they'll pick the diamond, chances are. So it's down to scarcity. And that's what economics is about. Okay, the last part is alternative uses. Well, there's a problem that whenever we do something in one direction, if we commit all our resources in one direction, it means we can't do something else. If you study economics at university, you can't study philosophy, or you can't study art. You can't study whatever your next best alternative is. You've done one. You've committed your time to economics. You can't do something else. Whilst you're doing economics, it's unlikely you can do another degree at the same time. So we have alternative uses, and we need to take that into account. And this will be illustrated in a different class called Guns and Butter. I'll talk about it later in that class. So that's it. That's all we're going to deal with here. This is just over half an hour. This video coming up to 31 minutes. So thank you for sticking with us, and watch out for the Guns and Butter class that's coming up as well. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.